Across the world's oldest myths, a single story repeats of luminous beings who came from the sky, walked among early humans, and shaped the first civilizations. The Sumerians called them the Anunnaki, the Egyptians the Neteru, the Maya the Kukulkan. Though separated by oceans and time, every ancient people remembered them as teachers, builders of cities, givers of language, keepers of the stars. Their arrival marked the dawn of order, their departure the beginning of myth. In this documentary, we explore the traces they left behind: clay tablets, stone alignments, hidden chambers, and words that still point toward the heavens. Through quiet ruins and forgotten symbols, we follow the story of when the gods descended and how their memory shaped mankind. Tonight, we journey through time's oldest silence to the moment when heaven touched earth and the world first learned to look up. The arrival from the sky. There are stories told across every ancient land, accounts of beings that did not walk out of the earth, but descended from the sky. They are found in clay tablets, carved stones, oral traditions, and songs that predate written language itself. Civilizations separated by oceans and millennia, all describing tall, luminous figures who came down from above, bringing knowledge, order, and the first laws of civilization. In Mesopotamia, they were called the Anunnaki. In Mesoamerica, the Kukulkan or Quetzalcoatl. In India, the Devas and Vimanas. In Egypt, they were the Neteru. Each culture used its own word for the same vision. Gods who descended in bright craft or columns of light shaped humanity, and then returned to the heavens. In the cradle of Sumer, around 4000 BCE, clay tablets describe the Anunnaki as those who from heaven to earth came. The oldest accounts, such as the Epic of Atrahasis and the Enuma Elish, speak of a time when humans were primitive, laboring without guidance. Then came beings from the sky who carried the tablets of destiny, instructing mankind in writing, agriculture, and the use of metals. Sumerian priests recorded the names of these beings as Enki, Enlil, Ninmah, and others figures, whose roles resembled those of teachers more than conquerors. Excavated tablets from Nippur describe them as clothed in brilliance, with voices like thunder, and vehicles that whirled with wind. Archaeologists read these lines as poetic invention, yet the recurring details, sound, light, descent, repeat in texts from continents that never met. In the Nile Valley, around the same era, Egyptian scribes told of Ra, Osiris, and Thoth arriving in the first time, which they called Zep-Tepi. The term means the beginning, but also implies a cycle, a previous world restored. Reliefs from Edfu temples speak of the builders of the mounds, beings who came on floating vessels after a great flood, carrying instruments that measured the earth. Thoth, the god of wisdom, was said to have written the Book of the Hidden Chamber, a record of all knowledge passed to man. In older hieroglyphs, Ra is not shown descending from the sun, but arriving within it, suggesting a craft interpreted as a solar disk. To the Egyptians, the sky was both home and passageway. They did not imagine gods walking out of dust. They watched them land in light. Thousands of miles away, in the high Andes, Incan legend told of Viracocha, the bearded teacher who rose from Lake Titicaca after a long night that covered the earth. He brought language, architecture, and celestial calendars before departing across the Pacific in a chariot that shone like the sun. Spanish chroniclers in the 16th century, including Pedro Chiesa de Leon, recorded that natives described Viracocha as tall, pale, and clothed in flowing garments, figures unrecognizable to the indigenous population's own features. The same form appears in Aztec and Maya records under different names: Kukulkan, Quetzalcoatl, Gucumatz. Each bore the same symbols: the feathered serpent, the sky path, the promise to return. In India's Mahabharata, dated between 400 BCE and 400 CE, but drawing on far older oral sources. Ancient poets describe the sky filled with machines called vimanas. The texts detail their shapes, sounds, and movement circular craft with multiple levels, driven by what was called fire from Mercury. Passages describe battles fought between these sky chariots, flashes brighter than 1,000 suns, and cities reduced to dust. Scholars interpret these as metaphors of divine warfare. But the technical precision in verses such as those of the Samarangana Sutradhara, a 12th century compilation referencing flying machines built with iron joints and quicksilver engines, has led others to suspect that the poets were preserving fragments of lost engineering knowledge. Even in the isolated islands of the Pacific, the same pattern emerged. The Dogon of Mali, West Africa, described visitors from the Sirius star system, the Nommo, who descended in a vessel accompanied by thunder and wind. Their oral history, documented by anthropologists Marcel Griol and Germain Dieterlen in the 1940 seconds, accurately described the existence of Sirius B, a white dwarf companion star, invisible to the naked eye, and only discovered by modern telescopes in 1862. The Dogon claimed that these beings taught them about the stars, agriculture, and the foundations of moral law. When asked how such knowledge survived, the elders said simply, "They came from the sky, and they will return." Across early China, texts from the Shanhai Jing, the classic of mountains and seas, describe luminous beings descending on stone platforms, teaching the emperor the order of heaven. The Yellow Emperor, Huangdi, is said to have arrived on a dragon of fire that could ascend to the stars. After ruling for 100 years, he departed the same way, vanishing into the clouds as music echoed through the valleys. In Japan, the Tennin and Amatsukami celestial beings, with shining robes, mirrored these same qualities. Otherworldly teachers who bridged heaven and earth. In the myths of the Hopi and Zuni tribes of North America, the ancestors came from the Sipapuni, a hole in the ground that led to another world. Yet the Kakina spirits, who taught them how to grow corn and build pueblos, came from the stars, specifically from the constellation Orion. Their rituals still depict masked figures descending from the sky each year, reenacting the arrival of those who once walked among men. What connects all of these accounts is not faith, but pattern. The pattern of descent, of guidance, of departure. Whether the source was a real event witnessed differently by each culture, or a shared symbolic memory carried through time, remains unknown. Ancient carvings, from the winged discs of Assyria to the star maps of the Maya, all carry the same direction upward. In 1909, a newspaper article from the Arizona Gazette reported the discovery of a vast underground network near the Grand Canyon, allegedly filled with Egyptian-style relics and carvings of figures with elongated heads pointing toward the sky. Though never verified, the report echoed the same motif, the link between sky gods and subterranean origins, as if humanity's earliest teachers lived above and below, forming a bridge between worlds. Archaeologists, linguists, and skeptics call these coincidences of imagination. Yet when examined together, these stories resemble not a religion, but a record. They describe light descending through clouds, thunderous sounds, beings clothed in brightness, and knowledge granted before departure. When early humans looked up and saw fire moving against the stars, they called them gods. When those fires landed, they built civilizations around their memory. The tablets of the sky. In the ruins of ancient Mesopotamia, beneath layers of sand and shattered pottery, archaeologists uncovered thousands of clay tablets. They were small, some barely the size of a hand, pressed with wedge-shaped markings known as cuneiform. To early scholars, these were merely lists of grain, trade, or taxes. But among them, certain tablets stood apart. They spoke not of kings or crops, but of beings who descended from the firmament, carrying the laws of creation itself. These writings would later be called the Sumerian tablets, the earliest known records of humanity's supposed contact with the gods of the sky. One of the oldest collections, the Enuma Elish, describes a world in disorder before the arrival of celestial forces. It opens with the phrase, "when on high heaven had not been named." In it, the gods came not as spirits, but as travellers. They brought the measure of the earth and tools for the ordering of the world. Enlil, lord of the air, separated heaven from ground, while Enki, lord of the waters, shaped man from the clay of the riverbed. The purpose of this creation, the text says, was not worship but labour. Humanity was formed to bear the yoke of the gods, maintaining what they had built. Another record, known as the Atrahasis Epic, repeats the same structure. It tells of celestial beings who found the labour of creation too heavy and sought helpers. In council, the higher gods commanded the lower ones to mix their own essence with clay. The result was Lulu, the first man. When this tablet was translated in 1876 by George Smith at the British Museum, it startled scholars who recognised parallels with Genesis, created from dust, guided by divine hands. Yet the Sumerian text predated the Bible by over 1,000 years. The tablets did more than describe creation, they catalogued technology, order, and celestial motion. The Mull, Appin, for example, contained precise star charts dating to 1000 BCE, listing the paths of planets across the ecliptic and predicting eclipses. These charts were not random observations. They described the sky as a map drawn long before telescopes existed. Another tablet, the Sumerian King List, recorded rulers who reigned for tens of thousands of years before the Great Flood. The first name on the list, Alulim of Eridu, is said to have ruled for 28,800 years before kingship descended from heaven. Scholars regard these as symbolic exaggerations, yet to the ancients, such reigns were literal, the age of divine kings before mortal rule began. Excavations at Nippur, Ur, and Lagash in the early 20th century revealed artifacts that seemed to match the descriptions of divine descent. Among them were cylinder seals, tiny stone rollers, etched with scenes of winged beings hovering over humans, holding objects shaped like tools or rods. One seal, catalogued as VA 243, depicts a seated figure before what appears to be a solar system, a large central circle surrounded by smaller spheres. Zecharia Sitchin, in his 1976 book The 12th Planet, interpreted this as proof that the Sumerians knew of planets beyond Saturn. Most archaeologists disagreed, calling it artistic convention, but the seal remains one of the earliest known diagrams resembling our solar system. In the ruins of Nineveh, the royal library of King Ashurbanipal preserved more than 20,000 tablets. Among them, scholars found copies of older Sumerian stories describing flying objects called shems. The word translates to sky chambers or vessels of the heavens. One passage in the Epic of Gilgamesh recounts the hero's journey to meet Utnapishtim, the survivor of the flood. To reach him, Gilgamesh must pass through the gates guarded by scorpion men figures who gleamed like copper and watched the rising and setting of the sun. Beyond the gate, he travels in darkness for 12 leagues until a light appears described as the brilliance of heaven. Ancient translators considered this a metaphor for enlightenment. Yet the language reads more like an observation of machinery portals, corridors, radiance. Gilgamesh himself was said to be 2/3 divine. His father, Lugalbanda, is described as one who entered the mountain and became bright as the sky. Some tablets portray him ascending into the heavens in a storm. The recurring theme beings entering mountains, shining, and departing upward suggests that these were not just metaphors for death, but perhaps for contact with forces perceived as gods. In Eridu, one of the oldest Sumerian cities, Excavations revealed layers of temples built atop one another, the earliest dating to around 5,400 BCE. At the lowest levels were clay cones embedded in walls, each inscribed with praises to Enki. The texts refer to Eridu as the home of the gods who measured the sky. The ziggurats that rose later in Babylon and replicated this vertical design, a step-by-step ascent toward the heavens, mirroring the stairway described in later Hebrew and Greek writings. Linguists studying the tablets noted an odd consistency. The word for heaven in Sumerian, An, was often written alongside Ki, meaning earth. Together, they formed Anki, or heaven, earth. The beings associated with both realms were the Anunnaki. Their name was not pluralized like gods of Olympus. It was a collective, a group belonging to both sky and ground. In administrative tablets, their symbols appear beside records of mining, metallurgy, and irrigation. These are not the attributes of distant deities, but of overseers and builders. When the Assyrians later inherited these stories, they reshaped them into a strict divine hierarchy. The Anunnaki became celestial judges. Enlil became the voice of authority, and Enki the keeper of forbidden wisdom. But beneath the theology remained the same image, beings from above who gave humanity both the gift and burden of knowledge. Modern scholars such as Samuel Noah Kramer, who translated hundreds of these tablets in the 20th century, described them as humanity's first attempt to explain order through memory. In his writings, Kramer noted, "The Sumerians believed they were taught everything they knew." The phrase, "from heaven to earth they came," appears so often across Sumerian and Akkadian tablets that even skeptics admit it was central to their worldview. Whether symbolic or literal, it defined the boundary between mortal and divine. A tablet discovered at Sippar adds one final detail. It tells of a great shining chariot resting upon the plain after a storm. The people, afraid, brought offerings. From within came voices that spoke the words of the stars. When the chariot departed, it left a trail of fire that touched the clouds. The date of the inscription is unknown, possibly older than 3000 BCE. Its language is calm, not worshipful, as though describing an event rather than a vision. Through these clay records, one sees a civilization trying to write what it saw or thought it saw. Their gods were not abstract spirits. They had names, ranks, and duties. They measured land, charted stars, and appointed kings. And when they left behind tablets a form of communication that outlasted their presence. The sky had been their home. The clay became ours. The architects of light. Across the world, monuments of impossible scale rise from the earth, as if built to touch the heavens. They appear in deserts, jungles, and plains, constructed with precision that modern engineers still struggle to explain. The Sumerian ziggurats, the Egyptian pyramids, and the stepped temples of Mesoamerica all share one feature: alignment with the stars. Each structure points upward, tracing a geometry that connects sky and ground. For early civilizations, these were not only temples, they were communication towers, links to the beings who once descended in light. In Mesopotamia, the ziggurat of was built around 2100 BCE by King Ur-Nammu, dedicated to the moon god Nana. Its core of mud brick rose in terraces toward a small chamber at the top known as the Shrine of Meeting. Archaeologists found remnants of bitumen and blue glaze on its steps, suggesting it once shone under the sun like polished stone. Ancient inscriptions called it Etemeniguru, meaning house whose foundation creates terror. The phrase implies not fear, but awe, the reverence of witnessing power descending from above. Priests climbed the stairways carrying offerings, believing that from the highest platform the gods would appear. The ziggurat's precise orientation to the cardinal points north, south, east, west mirrors the later alignment of pyramids in Egypt and temples in Teotihuacan, separated by continents yet sharing identical precision. In Egypt, the pyramid complex of Giza follows the same principle of correspondence. The Great Pyramid, attributed to Khufu, stands at a latitude that nearly divides the planet's northern and southern hemispheres equally. Its sides are aligned with less than 1/10 of a degree of error to true north. For a structure built over 4,000 years ago, such accuracy seems beyond simple tools of rope and plumbline. The inner shafts of the pyramid, once thought to be ventilation tunnels, point directly toward Orion's belt and the star Sirius, both associated with Osiris and Isis, deities linked to the sky and rebirth. The ancient texts called the pyramid Akhet Khufu, the horizon of Khufu, implying it was a place where the king's spirit joined the gods among the stars. What is striking is that the same constellation Orion appears in architectural alignments from cultures that never met. The three main pyramids at Giza mirror Orion's belt. Thousands of miles away, the pyramids of Teotihuacan's sun, moon, and Quetzalcoatl follow the same triadic pattern. At the ancient city of Teotihuacan, whose name means place where men become gods, archaeologists found that its main avenue, the Avenue of the Dead, aligns 15 degrees east of north, matching the rising of the Pleiades around 150 CE. The Maya continued this tradition, constructing temples like El Castillo at Chichen Itza, whose 365 steps mark each day of the solar year. During the equinox, a shadow serpent appears to slither down the staircase, an illusion of light that connects heaven, stone, and myth. In the Andes, the stones of Sacsayhuaman fit together so perfectly that even modern blades cannot slip between them. Some blocks weigh over 100 tons, yet they interlock without mortar. The Inca said the walls were built by Viracocha, the sky god who taught their ancestors after the flood. Local legends described stones that moved themselves, rolling into place as commanded by sound or breath. Spanish chroniclers dismissed this as fable, but the same stories reappear in Egypt, where priests of Thoth claim the pyramids were raised by words of power that made stone lighter than air. In Angkor Wat, built by the Khmer Empire in the 12th century, 5 towers rise to form a lotus pattern that mirrors the constellation Draco at the time of the spring equinox. The central spire represents Mount Meru, the cosmic mountain said to connect Earth to heaven. Its corridors are arranged with astronomical precision. Each gallery length corresponds to a measure of time in Hindu cosmology years, yugas, and cycles of creation. The same mathematical ratios that appear in the Giza pyramid 1:1, 618, the golden proportion are repeated here, as though all builders were referencing the same cosmic template. Archaeologists often describe these alignments as religious symbolism, yet the scope and accuracy suggest a shared understanding of geometry and the movement of celestial bodies far beyond what early tools could achieve. The ziggurat, the pyramid, the stepped temple, each functions as an observatory, calendar, and ritual gateway. When the sun reached a certain angle, or the star, Sirius reappeared after its 70-day absence. Rituals marked what they called the return of the gods. In the Sumerian Ekur texts, the ziggurat of Nippur is described as a binding place between heaven and earth. In Egypt, the Book of the Dead calls the pyramid the ladder of ascent. In Central America, the Popol Vuh recounts how the gods descended on the stair of light. The architectural language was universal. Steps, ascension, alignment. It was as if each structure preserved a memory of descent, frozen in stone. Modern researchers like Robert Bauval and Graham Hancock noticed that these monuments share not only star alignments, but also geological markers indicating advanced surveying. The pyramids of Giza and Teotihuacan both lie near 30 degrees latitude, a position offering optimal visibility of Orion's belt. Even the platform at Baalbek in Lebanon, home to the Roman Temple of Jupiter, rests atop 3 massive foundation stones, each over 800 tons, whose placement predates the Roman structure itself. Local legend called them the Trilithon of the Giants, built by a race of sky beings who walked among clouds. At night, when ancient priests looked up from these towers, they saw the same constellations modern eyes see today. But to them, those points of light were not distant suns, they were homes. Their orientation of temples towards specific stars was less about worship and more about navigation. The sky was a map, and each monument a coordinate. Even in more recent epochs, echoes of this cosmic architecture persisted. Gothic cathedrals in Europe were oriented to solstice sunrises. The Dome of the Rock in Jerusalem aligns with the rising of Canopus, and the layout of Washington, D.C. incorporates Masonic geometric ratios identical to those found in Egyptian temples. The blueprint seems ancient, unbroken, and endlessly adapted. The builders of these structures claimed guidance from beings of light. In inscriptions at Abu Simbel, Ramses II describes being shown the measure of the temple by Ra himself. At Tikal, the Mayan priests wrote that the plans of their pyramids came from the path of the serpent of the sky. These phrases are not isolated. They form a network of testimonies spanning continents, each one suggesting instruction rather than invention. Whether those architects of light were real or symbolic, the monuments they inspired still point upward, waiting. Stone holds memory better than words. And through every age, humanity continued to build, to align, to imitate what once came from above, the messengers between worlds. In the oldest records of human memory, there are figures who walk between worlds. They are not gods and not men, but something in between. They speak the language of the sky and the tongue of the earth. They are the interpreters of light, the translators of order, the ones who carried knowledge from the heavens and placed it into human hands. Across continents, they are remembered by different names: Thoth, Hermes, Enoch, Viracocha, Quetzalcoatl, Oannes, each described as the bridge between humanity and the beings who once descended from above. The Sumerians called them Apkallu, the 7 sages. Ancient tablets from Nineveh describe these beings emerging from the sea after the gods had shaped the world, but before mankind knew wisdom. They taught the people how to write, measure, build temples, and chart the skies. One of them, Oannes, is said to have had the body of a fish, but the voice of a man. The historian Berossus, writing in the 3rd century BCE, recorded that Oannes came each morning from the sea, taught through the day, and returned to the waters at night. His message was not one of worship, but of understanding. He instructed them in all things that could tend to soften manners and humanize life. In Egypt, the same idea took form as Thoth, the god of writing, time, and mathematics. He is depicted with the head of an ibis, holding the reed pen and scroll, recording the words of creation itself. The Egyptians called him Tehuti, he who measures. It was Thoth, they said, who gave them the art of hieroglyphs and the calendar of the sun. In temple carvings, he stands beside Ra, acting as interpreter between gods and men. The Greeks later equated him with Hermes, and the fusion of the two became Hermes Trismegistus, the thrice great. From this figure emerged the Corpus Hermeticum, a series of writings that appeared in the early centuries of the Common Era, filled with echoes of older truths. As above, so below. The phrase, simple and quiet, captures the entire bridge, the belief that what happens in the heavens is mirrored on earth, and that man's mind can reflect the mind of the cosmos. In Mesoamerica, the intermediary was Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, both sky and earth combined. The serpent symbolized knowledge and the shedding of ignorance. The feathers symbolized ascent. He arrived, the stories say, from the east, across the ocean, bringing laws, teaching cultivation, and forbidding human sacrifice. When his time ended, he left toward the dawn, promising to return in a year of the same sign. Centuries later, when Spanish ships appeared on the horizon under Cortés, some of the Aztec priests believed the prophecy fulfilled. They saw the conquerors not as invaders, but as the return of the teacher who once walked among them. In the highlands of Peru, the Incas spoke of Viracocha, who rose from Lake Titicaca after the flood. Like Quetzalcoatl, he was bearded, clothed in white, and carried a staff that glowed. He traveled from village to village teaching architecture, astronomy, and the proper rites of worship. When his work was done, he walked across the ocean, vanishing into the horizon. The Spanish chronicler Pedro Sarmiento de Gamboa recorded that even in the 16th century, locals pointed to ruins older than memory and said these were built by the Viracocha, the messengers of the sky. In the Hebrew and early Christian traditions, these intermediaries appear as the Watchers. The Book of Enoch, an ancient text excluded from the biblical canon but preserved in Ethiopia, tells of 200 beings who descended upon Mount Hermon in the days of Jared. They taught men metalworking and women the arts of adornment. But their union with mortals, it says, produced giants Nephilim, whose violence brought ruin to the world. The story of the Watchers is one of both gift and corruption, knowledge given without restraint. And they taught charms and enchantments and made them acquainted with the cutting of roots. Enoch, described as a righteous man, was chosen to speak with these beings and record their warnings. The text says he was later taken up, leaving no body behind. To later mystics, Enoch became Metatron, the scribe of heaven, the divine recorder, much like Thoth before him. The same pattern appears in Greece with Prometheus, who stole fire from the gods and gave it to man. For this he was bound to a rock, his punishment eternal. Fire was not simply warmth, it was knowledge, invention, and the spark of creation itself. In Polynesia, the demigod Maui performed the same act, bringing fire and teaching navigation by stars. In India, Matsya, the fish avatar of Vishnu, warned the first man of an approaching flood and guided his boat to safety, carrying with him the seeds of life. The names change, but the pattern remains. Beings from the water or sky who bring order to chaos, knowledge to ignorance, then depart, sometimes punished, sometimes ascended. What ties these stories together is not only the descent from above, but the mediation between realms. The gods, distant and immense, do not speak directly. Their words require translation by those who can exist in both elements, light and matter. The Egyptians placed Thoth's image at the entrance of every library, as if to remind that knowledge itself was divine communication. The Sumerians carved fishmen on their temple gates to honor the Apkallu who first taught them. The Maya sculpted the feathered serpent on stairways leading skyward, the bridge made visible in stone. In some cultures, these messengers became immortalized as entire castes, the priest-scribes of Mesopotamia, the pharaoh's astronomers in Egypt, the Mayan Arkin, or sun interpreters. Their duty was not to rule, but to remember. They watched the skies, recorded the patterns, and waited for signs of return. Each observatory, each temple, was both a memory and a listening post. As centuries passed, the faces of the messengers blurred into myth. Their names became metaphors, their tools transformed into symbols. The writing stylus became the wand of magic. The measuring rod became the scepter. The scroll became the book of wisdom. Yet in every myth, there is still the whisper that knowledge came from elsewhere, that humanity did not invent civilization entirely alone. In the end, what these figures gave was more than skill. They taught continuity, the belief that man could mirror the heavens, that order above could inspire order below. From that principle grew calendars, cities, and languages. Whether they were divine envoys, early scientists, or myths born of the need to explain genius, they remain the voice between two worlds, one remembered in clay, the other written in the sky. The flood and the memory of reset. In almost every ancient story of origins, there comes a moment when the world is washed away. The same event appears under different skies, told in different languages, yet always with the same pattern: an age of greatness, a warning from above, then a flood that ends it all. The survivors become the founders of a new era. To the ancients, the deluge was not only punishment or cleansing, it was the boundary between the age when the gods walked among men and the quiet age that followed. The Sumerians told it first, in a tablet written more than 4,000 years ago. In the Epic of Atrahasis, the gods decide to destroy humanity because the noise of mankind has become too great. Enlil, the ruler of the air, orders the waters released. Enki, the friend of man, warns Atrahasis, instructing him to build a great boat sealed with pitch. "Abandon your house," he says, "build a ship, and take into it the seed of all living things." The flood lasts 7 days and nights. When the storm passes, Atrahasis releases birds to find dry land. One returns with mud on its feet. The pattern of salvation, obedience, and renewal is set the same that later appears in Genesis, long after the tablets were buried beneath sand. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, the same event is told through Utnapishtim, who claims to have survived the flood by building a vessel shaped like a cube, equal in length and breadth. He fills it with animals, gold, and his family. When the storm ends, his boat comes to rest on the mountains of Nisir. Gilgamesh, seeking immortality, listens as Utnapishtim recounts how the gods regretted their decision, realizing that humanity had carried forward their memory. The flood, Utnapishtim says, was not the end of man, but the end of the connection between heaven and earth. Far away, in Hebrew tradition, the same structure repeats. Noah is warned by God to build an ark, 300 cubits long, and fill it with pears of every species. The rain falls for 40 days and nights. When the waters recede, the ark rests upon the mountains of Ararat. Noah releases a dove that returns with an olive branch. God establishes a covenant, marked by a rainbow, a sign that such destruction will not come again. But older texts hint that Noah's knowledge was inherited from those before him. The Book of Enoch, once kept alongside Genesis, speaks of the watchers who descended and later were bound beneath the earth after the flood. Their wisdom, it says, was preserved by Noah through secret books. In Greece, Deucalion and his wife Pyrrha survive a similar deluge. Warned by the Titan Prometheus, they build a chest and float for 9 days until landing on Mount Parnassus. To repopulate the world, they throw stones behind them that transform into men and women, earth reborn as flesh. In India's Shatapatha Brahmana, the man Manu is told by a fish, an avatar of Vishnu, that a flood will come. The fish instructs him to build a boat and tie it to the horn of the fish, which tows him to safety atop the northern mountains. When the waters retreat, Manu offers sacrifice and begins a new humanity. In the Americas, the Maya Popol Vuh describes the gods flooding their first creation after it failed to honor them. Only a few beings survive, hidden in hollow logs. The Aztecs speak of Nata and Nina, warned by the god Titlacahuan to hollow out a cypress tree before the waters come. When the flood ends, they light a fire, but are turned into dogs for disobeying the command to remain silent. The Hopi tell of Tawa, the sun spirit, who instructs a faithful few to shelter underground while the world is cleansed. When they emerge, they follow a spiral path to the surface, the same symbol carved on ancient rocks across the American Southwest. Archaeology has found hints of floods in layers of silt scattered through Mesopotamia and along the Tigris and Euphrates. Excavations at Shuruppak and Kish revealed clay strata several feet thick, evidence of massive inundations around 2900 BCE. But the reach of the flood stories suggests something broader, a memory of global change at the end of the last ice age, around 11,600 years ago, when sea levels rose dramatically. In the language of myth, that event became the dividing line between the old world and the new. In Sumerian texts, after the flood, the gods measure anew the foundations of the earth. They appoint new rulers, grant new calendars, and instruct humans in the ways of agriculture once more. The king list states, "Then kingship descended again from heaven." Civilization begins a second time. The Egyptians called this the first time Zep Tepi, when the gods returned after darkness. The Maya called it the dawn of the fifth Sunday. The Andean people spoke of a world destroyed by water before Viracocha's arrival. Each tradition marks a reset, not only of life, but of memory. Among the Dogon of West Africa, the flood is described not as punishment, but as purification. The Nomo, the amphibious sky beings, descend once more after the waters, bringing new order to the world. They rebuild agriculture and teach that the stars guide seasons. The pattern of instruction resumes, as though the flood was a deliberate clearing and erasure of corruption before contact could begin again. Even in the fragments left by later civilizations, faint traces of this belief remain. Plato, writing in the Timaeus, records the Egyptian priest of Sais, telling Solon that floods and fires come in cycles, wiping away knowledge before it can become too great. "You Greeks are but children," the priest says, "for you have no belief rooted in old age of soul." To the Egyptians, memory itself was cyclical, renewed after each catastrophe. Across these accounts, the flood acts as both destruction and preservation. The ark, the mountain, the cavern, the seed, all symbolize continuity. Something is always carried forward: the names of the gods, the measure of the stars, the arts of building and writing. Humanity is reborn, but never from nothing. There is always an inheritance from before the water. The deluge myths endure because they describe not only a natural disaster, but a psychological boundary. They divide the time of open contact from the time of distance. After the waters recede, the gods withdraw. The messengers disappear. The age of direct instruction ends. What remains are stories, monuments, and a few survivors who claim to remember what the world once was. The flood, to those who came after, was not just the end of an age. It was the silence that followed the long stillness in which mankind began to wonder whether the beings from the sky would ever return. The return of the silent stars. When the waters of the great flood receded, humanity turned its eyes upward again. The mountains were quiet. The cities of the gods had vanished. What remained were stones, symbols, and the memory of light descending from the sky. In that silence, men began to watch the heavens with purpose. They built towers, circles, and sightlines mechanisms to measure time by the movement of stars. Across continents, the same question echoed: would the beings from the sky return? In Sumer, the priests of Uruk stood on the flat roofs of ziggurats, tracing the slow crawl of constellations. They named the stars after the gods who once walked among them: Anu, Enlil, Inanna. The oldest star catalogues, written in cuneiform around 1800 BCE, record the heliacal risings of planets and fixed stars. To the Sumerians, each appearance or disappearance of a celestial body marked the journey of a divine being. The god had not died. He had travelled beyond the horizon of visibility. When it returned months later, it was a visitation renewed. In Egypt, the priest astronomers of Heliopolis built their calendars around Sirius, the star they called Sopdet. Its reappearance at dawn in July coincided with the flooding of the Nile, the event that renewed the land each year. They saw it as the Eye of Isis, heralding the rebirth of Osiris, the Sky King. Every new year began with that rising. The pyramid texts refer to the departed pharaoh as one who joins the imperishable stars. These stars, fixed in the northern sky, never sank below the horizon. To be among them was to dwell eternally with the gods who had once descended. Far to the west, the builders of Stonehenge raised stones that aligned with solstices and lunar extremes. Around 2500 BCE, its great trilithons framed the midsummer sunrise and midwinter sunset with perfect precision. The purpose was not purely agricultural. Buried beneath and around the stones were cremated remains and offerings, suggesting ritual. To early observers, the cycle of light and shadow mirrored the rhythm of descent and return. Each solstice, when the sun appeared to halt and reverse its path, was a reminder that movement in the heavens was never random, it was communication. In Central America, the Maya refined this art into mathematics. At Copan, Uxmal, and Chichen Itza, they built observatories with narrow slits through which they charted the Venus cycle with near-modern accuracy. The Dresden Codex, a surviving Mayan text, lists the planet's appearances over a 584-day cycle. The priests called Venus Chak Ek the Great Star, and believed it was the path of the feathered serpent god, Quetzalcoatl, travelling through the heavens. When Venus vanished into the sun's glare, it was his descent into the underworld. When it reappeared as the morning star, it marked his resurrection. The pattern of planetary motion became a retelling of divine movement. In ancient China, astronomers recorded guest stars, sudden new lights that appeared in the sky and faded after weeks. A record from 1054 CE describes such a star in Taurus, visible even in daylight. Modern science knows it as the supernova that created the Crab Nebula. But to the Song dynasty scholars, it was an omen, a celestial messenger returning and departing again. Older texts from the Zhou period, over 2,000 years earlier, speak of dragons of fire crossing the heavens, leaving trails that shimmered like scales. To them, the sky was not static, it was alive. Among the Polynesians, the stars were roads. Navigators memorized hundreds of constellations, steering by their rising and setting points on the horizon. Each voyage was guided by what they called the star compass, a mental map that bound sea and sky together. The Pleiades cluster, known across cultures as the Seven Sisters, marked the time of planting and migration. The same stars guided Egyptian builders, Babylonian priests, and Incan farmers. In every hemisphere, they were tied to beginnings. The search for the returning gods also shaped mythic calendars. The Aztecs believed history moved in cycles called suns, each destroyed by a different force: jaguar, wind, fire, water. The fifth sun, their present age, would end when the gods returned to restart the cycle. In Greece, philosophers like Heraclitus, and later the Stoics spoke of the ekpyrosis, a cosmic renewal by fire after each great age. Even in the Book of Revelation, written in the 1st century CE, stars fall, trumpets sound, and the heavens open language, echoing the ancient pattern of descent. To measure these patterns, early astronomers constructed devices both humble and complex. In 1901, divers off the Greek island of Antikythera recovered a corroded bronze mechanism from a shipwreck dated to around 100 BCE. Inside were interlocking gears capable of predicting eclipses and planetary positions. Modern reconstructions revealed it as the world's first analog computer. It mirrored the movements of the heavens with mathematical precision, an artifact of a time when skywatching was both science and worship. The mechanism's purpose was practical, yet its existence points to an older idea, that to understand the stars was to prepare for someone's return. In Babylonia, temple inscriptions described the watchers of the night priests who stood atop towers, writing down omens from the skies. If a star flashes in the east and vanishes, one record states, the king's messenger will not return. These texts were manuals of correlation, linking celestial phenomena with human fate. The heavens were a script, and the interpreter's role was to read what the gods were saying from afar. In Mesoamerica, the observatory at Palenque contains a tablet describing the descent of a divine figure from a band of stars. The carving shows a figure seated on what looks like a control panel, surrounded by swirling smoke and symbols of fire. Archaeologists call it the Tablet of the Cross. Others see it as a depiction of flight. Whether sacred vision or memory, the theme remains the gods departed through the heavens, and someday would return from the same direction. Among the Dogon people, the Sirius system held special meaning. They spoke of a companion star, invisible to the naked eye, orbiting every 50 years. When astronomers discovered Sirius B in the 19th century, it matched the Dogon's oral description, a dense, heavy star, whose orbit was known long before telescopes confirmed it. To them, Sirius was the seat of the Nommo, the sky beings who promised to return when the seed of man and star are again one. By the first millennium BCE, across civilizations, the focus had shifted from stories of descent to calculation of return. The heavens became a clock, its hands moving through vast ages. The Sumerians divided the circle into 360 degrees, and time into hours, minutes, seconds tools to measure not merely days but epochs. The Mayans counted baktuns, the Hindus counted yugas, the Greeks counted ages of gold and iron. All pointed towards cycles periods when the veil between worlds would open again. Night after night, people stood on high places, marking the path of silent stars. They did not pray to them, they listened. The sky had once spoken through thunder and flame. Now it whispered through motion. The watchers believed that when the alignment returned, when certain stars stood, as they once did, the beings who taught them would descend again. Whether that alignment has passed or is yet to come, no one knows. But the monuments, the calendars, and the myths remain, each a record of patient waiting written in stone and starlight. The language of the gods. The first words carved into clay and stone were not made for poetry or trade. They were meant for remembrance. To the earliest civilizations, writing was not invention, it was revelation. The Sumerians, Egyptians, and Indus builders all said the same thing. Symbols came from the sky. Language was a gift given to record the order of the world, a reflection of divine structure shaped into lines, marks, and numbers. Every script carried echoes of that first exchange between mankind and the beings who once descended to teach them. In Sumer, the earliest writing appeared around 3200 BCE. The clay tablets from Uruk show neat impressions, pressed with a reed stylus, cuneiform, meaning wedge-shaped. Most of the first examples are lists, grain, livestock, dates, but among them are prayers, songs, and instructions attributed to Nisaba, the goddess of writing and accounting. She was said to have received her tablet from Enki, the god of wisdom, who gave the measure of words to mankind. In one hymn, she is called the woman who opens the mouth of heaven. The act of writing was described not as creation, but as transmission, humans learning to copy the divine text already written in the sky. The Egyptians echoed the same idea. Their hieroglyphs, pictures of birds, eyes, and suns, were known as Medjugorje, the words of the gods. Thoth, the ibis-headed scribe, was said to have invented them after hearing the speech of Ra, the solar deity. On temple walls, Thoth appears writing with a stylus on a palm leaf while the gods dictate before him. The inscriptions say he wrote all that is and all that shall be. To the Egyptians, writing carried power because it mirrored creation itself. Each hieroglyph was a living sign, infused with the same essence that shaped the cosmos. When scribes copied a name, they believed they sustained the soul of that name's bearer. A word carved was a life extended. In ancient China, a similar belief took root. The oldest Chinese script, discovered on oracle bones from the Shang dynasty around 1200 BCE, records questions to the gods burned into turtle shells and ox bones. The symbols, etched in fine lines, were said to have come from the pattern of stars. The legendary figure, Kangji part man, part divine, was credited with their creation. When he formed the first characters, the story says, "Grain fell from the sky, and ghosts cried at night." The reaction of heaven and earth marked the birth of writing. It was an act of cosmic communication, not human invention. The Mayans, too, described their glyphs as the language of the sky. Their codices, painted on bark paper, recorded cycles of Venus and the gods who travelled with it. The Popol Vuh recounts that the Creator spoke the world into being. They said earth, and the earth arose. Words were tools of creation, identical to the act of forming mountains and rivers. To speak was to shape reality. Mathematics held the same sanctity. The Sumerians counted in base 60, dividing the circle into 360 degrees and the hour into 60 minutes. Their number system was not arbitrary, it was derived from the cycles of the heavens. 60 was the sacred number of Anu, ruler of the sky. In Egypt, geometry developed from the measurement of land after the Nile's floods, yet priests said it was the art of divine proportion. The Great Pyramid's proportions encode pi, phi, and the ratio between the Earth's circumference and its polar radius. The builders said it was designed after the pattern of the heavens. Pythagoras, centuries later, would call numbers the thoughts of the gods. Across early civilizations, certain numbers appeared again and again: 3, 7, 12, 60. They marked not just quantities, but principles. 3 represented the division of heaven, earth, and underworld. 7 mirrored the visible planets and the days of the week. 12 matched the lunar cycles and the zodiac's houses. These numbers formed the framework of time and architecture. The temples of Babylon, the pyramids of Egypt, and the stone rings of Britain were all designed around them, as if the builders were following a universal code written in the stars. The study of geometry and proportion became a spiritual act. In Greece, the philosopher Plato taught that geometry leads the soul upward. His student Timaeus described the world as built from geometric forms: the cube, the tetrahedron, the sphere shapes that embodied divine harmony. These ideas were not Greek inventions, but echoes of older knowledge preserved through Egypt and Mesopotamia. In the Temple of Luxor, golden triangles and perfect ratios appear in the layout of columns and courtyards, predating Pythagoras by a millennium. In India, the Sulba Sutras, texts from around 800 BCE, gave precise geometric instructions for building fire altars. The measurements are exact. Construct a square altar equal in area to a circle. The mathematics implied solving for the area of a circle using the square root of 2 shows knowledge both ritual and scientific. Yet every line of instruction is framed as revelation. Thus did the gods measure. Sacred geometry connected architecture to cosmology. Mandalas, labyrinths, and the flower of life symbol found in Egyptian, Greek, and Asian art all express the same principle, that creation expands from a single point outward, like light radiating from the center of the sky. The pattern was believed to be the handwriting of the divine, proof that form itself followed an intelligent order. The ancients viewed language and number as twin gifts, speech to name creation, measure to understand it. Both linked humanity to the structure of the universe. When priests or scribes wrote, they imitated the process of Genesis. To miswrite a sign was not a clerical error, but a distortion of harmony. Every temple, every stela, every scroll was a fragment of an ongoing conversation between earth and heaven. Later traditions preserved the same belief under new forms. Hebrew mystics taught that the letters of the alphabet shaped reality, that the name of God contained all creation. The Greeks believed that the Logos, the divine word, ordered chaos. In Islam, calligraphy became the highest art, reflecting the belief that the written word of God carried intrinsic beauty and power. From these roots, all writing inherits a trace of reverence. The first scripts did not simply record what people saw, they recorded what they believed had been shown to them. Each line in clay or stone was a fragment of the lost dialogue between man and the sky. Whether the knowledge came through revelation, inspiration, or instruction from beings long vanished, its legacy remains visible in every alphabet, every equation, every tower aligned to the stars. To the ancient world, writing and mathematics were not tools for survival. They were proof that the gods had once spoken, and that humanity had learned to listen. The forbidden knowledge. As human civilization grew, so did curiosity. What the ancients had once received from the sky as gift began to be sought as power. The same knowledge that built temples and calendars also forged weapons and dominion. In almost every early culture, stories appeared warning that certain wisdom was not meant for man alone. These were not tales of ignorance, but of boundaries of lines drawn between the divine and the mortal. To cross them was to invite disaster. The Sumerians told of the Anunnaki beings who once shared their secrets with humanity. Among them was Enki, who taught writing, agriculture, and metalwork. But when humans began to use these arts for self-rule, defying the god's order, Enlil declared the knowledge forbidden. In the Atrahasis epic, the flood itself was framed as the consequence of overreach, a cleansing of the world that had learned too much. Yet Enki defied the decree, saving mankind through instruction. His rebellion marks one of the oldest records of compassion against divine command, a god choosing humanity over the silence of heaven. From Mesopotamia, the theme travelled westward. In the Hebrew book of Enoch, written between the 3rd and 1st centuries BCE, the Watcher's 200 celestial beings descend to teach humans the signs of the earth. One named Azazel reveals metalworking, the making of swords, mirrors, and jewelry. Others teach enchantments, astronomy, and the art of writing. The gift becomes corruption. They defiled themselves with the daughters of men, the text says, and taught them charms and knowledge. Their offspring, the Nephilim, bring violence to the world. For this the Watchers are bound beneath the mountains until the end of days. The text ends with a warning. Wisdom given too soon becomes ruin. In Greece, the story reappears as Prometheus. A titan of foresight, he steals fire from Olympus and gives it to mankind. With fire comes light, craft, and independence. Zeus punishes him, binding him to a rock where an eagle devours his liver each day. The myth is older than its words. It echoes the same idea of forbidden flame once belonging to the gods. Fire was not only physical heat, but the spark of reason. In giving it to man, Prometheus made humanity self-sufficient and therefore dangerous. In Egypt, Thoth was said to have written a book containing all the secrets of heaven and earth. When a mortal named Setni discovered it and read its words aloud, he unleashed forces he could not control. The papyrus warned that he who reads it will see the gods face to face, but his life will be forfeit. The story survived as a cautionary tale. Divine knowledge requires divine nature. To hold it without balance leads to collapse. In the Mahabharata of India, forbidden wisdom appears in the form of celestial weapons. The Brahmastra, said to shine brighter than 1,000 suns, could annihilate cities and poison the earth. Its use was restricted to the pure of heart. When the warrior Ashwatthama unleashes it in anger, his lineage is cursed. Modern readers have compared its description to atomic power, the same fusion of brilliance and destruction. The text records its aftermath. The rain no longer fell, the trees no longer gave fruit, the wombs of women dried. The story is less prophecy than memory, a warning that sacred energy, once misused, scorches both sky and soil. Among the Maya, the Popol Vuh describes how the first humans made of maize were too perfect. They saw too far, knew too much. The gods, fearful that mankind would rival them, blew mist into their eyes, clouding their vision. Their sight was diminished as breath upon glass. From then on, humanity could see only what was near. The limitation became a safeguard, a divine blinding to preserve balance. Throughout history, empires rose under the promise of recovered wisdom. In Babylon, priests claimed descent from the Apkallu, the ancient sages who once brought knowledge from the sea. Their libraries grew vast, filled with astronomy, medicine, and alchemy. Yet each era ended the same way. The towers fell, the libraries burned. In Egypt, the legendary city of Hermopolis was said to have guarded the Book of Thoth until it vanished. In Greece, the Temple of Delphi held secrets of prophecy that faded when the last oracle fell silent. The loss of these centers was not random, it was cyclical, as if knowledge itself demanded periodic erasure. In later centuries, the idea of forbidden wisdom re-emerged under different names. In the Middle Ages, alchemists sought the philosopher's stone, said to transmute base metal into gold and grant eternal life. Their symbols echoed Sumerian and Egyptian forms: the winged sun, the serpent eating its tail, the triangle within the circle. Each represented unity of heaven and earth, the same harmony once taught by the sky beings. But as the search continued, it became clear that the transformation was inward. "The stone," wrote one alchemist, "is the perfected man." The secret was not metal, but self-knowledge, hidden beneath layers of myth to protect it from misuse. Some traditions claim that forbidden knowledge was never lost, only concealed. The Gnostics of late antiquity believed the material world itself was a trap designed to keep humanity ignorant. To awaken was to remember one's origin in the stars. Their texts speak of a hidden spark within each person, a fragment of the divine imprisoned in flesh. Salvation came through gnosis, direct understanding, not faith. It was, again, knowledge as liberation, and again declared heresy by those who feared its power. The pattern of rise, revelation, and restraint repeats. Knowledge descends, humanity learns. Then a boundary is crossed, and the world resets. Floods, fires, exiles, each a symbolic correction. Perhaps these stories were the ancients' way of explaining natural disasters. Or perhaps they remembered real interventions, moments when the keepers of wisdom withdrew what they had once given. In every age, certain teachings remain sealed. The Sumerian tablets speak of the Me, divine decrees of civilization laws, crafts, emotions kept in the house of Enki. Only kings or priests could approach them. The Book of Enoch mentions secret books shown to Noah, hidden before the flood. In Egypt, only initiates of the temple schools could read the sacred geometry of creation. To the unprepared, knowledge was poison. To the worthy, it was light. Modern science calls progress what ancient myths called revelation. The names change electricity for fire, atom for sun, but the boundary remains, discovery balanced by consequence. The ancients left a warning in every myth. Not all doors should be opened at once. Whether the gods withdrew to protect mankind or to protect themselves, no one can say. But their silence endures like the pause between lightning and thunder, a reminder that power without understanding carries its own punishment. The bloodlines of the sky. In the earliest civilizations, rulership was not a human right. It was a gift passed down from the heavens. Kings and queens were not chosen by the people, but by the memory of descent. Across Sumer, Egypt, and the Andes, the same claim was made. The first rulers were born of gods who came from the sky. Their bloodlines were proof of contact, a living covenant between earth and the beings who once shaped mankind. The Sumerian king list, carved on clay tablets more than 4,000 years ago, begins with a striking line. After kingship descended from heaven, kingship was in Eridu. The phrase does not describe invention, but transference. Power came down like light, bestowed upon a chosen few. The first kings, Alulim, Alalgar, Onmenluana, are said to have ruled for thousands of years. Their reigns ended with the flood, after which kingship descended again. To the Sumerians, this was not metaphor. They believed bloodlines carried divine essence, traces of the beings who once taught them. The same pattern appears in Egypt. The earliest pharaohs, before the first dynasty, were called the Shemsu-Hor, the followers of Horus. Ancient lists from Abydos and Turin describe these mysterious rulers as predating recorded history. The Egyptians said they came in the time before time, governing for centuries before uniting the land. The pharaohs who followed claimed direct descent from them. In hieroglyphic inscriptions, each ruler bore titles such as Son of Ra, Heir of the Sky, or Horus in the flesh. The crown itself, shaped like the head of a falcon, was a symbol of flight, the image of heaven resting upon human form. The concept of divine kingship governed every aspect of Egyptian life. The coronation ceremony was not a political act, but a transformation. The ruler became the earthly vessel of a celestial spirit. In temple walls, at Karnak and Luxor, the god Amun is shown embracing the pharaoh, whispering the breath of life into his nostrils. The queen, in turn, bore the seed of divinity. Their children were not merely heirs, they were the continuation of the bond between gods and men. The idea would echo later in Europe, where monarchs claimed the divine right of kings, tracing legitimacy to heaven itself. In the ancient Andes, the Inca emperors declared themselves sons of the sun, descended from Inti, the sky deity who sent his children to teach mankind after the Great Flood. The first of them, Manco Capac and Mama Oclo, rose from Lake Titicaca, the same place where the god Viracocha once appeared. Their golden staff, which sank into fertile ground, marked the site of Cusco, the navel of the world. From that point, the Inca lineage spread outward, binding land and heaven through ritual bloodlines. The mummified bodies of past rulers were kept in temples, dressed, and seated among the living during ceremonies, symbolizing an unbroken chain of divine ancestry. In Mesoamerica, similar beliefs governed the Maya and Aztec empires. The kings of Palenque, such as Pakal the Great, traced their ancestry to celestial ancestors carved on stone tablets within the Temple of Inscriptions. Pakal's sarcophagus lid depicts him rising toward the heavens, surrounded by symbols of the Milky Way and planetary motion. The Aztec rulers of Tenochtitlan claimed descent from Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent, whose blood mixed with that of humans to create life after the flood. Royal rituals often involved the offering of blood, not as sacrifice, but as renewal of the covenant. To give blood was to feed the sun, to keep the link between sky and earth alive. The theme of divine lineage extends eastward as well. In early China, the emperors were called Tianzi Sons of Heaven. Their mandate, the Tianming, was conditional, granted by heaven but revoked by disorder. Solar eclipses, earthquakes, or famines were interpreted as signs that heaven had withdrawn its favor. The emperor ruled not by conquest, but by harmony between celestial and earthly order. The same belief shaped Japan's imperial family, who traced their ancestry to the sun goddess Amaterasu. Her descendant, Ninigi no Mikoto, was said to have descended from the heavens carrying the mirror, sword, and jewel, the three treasures symbolizing light, truth, and life. Throughout Africa, echoes of this cosmic lineage persisted. The Dogon of Mali, who spoke of the Nomo from Sirius, also believed that their first priests carried the seed of these star beings. The royal families of Mali and Songhai traced heritage through lines said to originate from those who came from the sky by water. In Ethiopia, the Solomonic dynasty claimed descent from King Solomon, and the Queen of Sheba figures tied, in turn, to the broader mythic bloodlines that bridge divine and mortal realms. In Europe, long after the Age of Temples, the idea survived under different names. The Merovingian kings of early France claimed a sacred origin, said to be descended from a sea creature, the quinator. Their symbol was the fleur de lis, a stylized lily representing the union of heaven, earth, and water. Medieval chroniclers whispered that their bloodline carried a light within. Similar tales followed the Templars, who were rumoured to guard relics not only of Christ, but of far older origins, records of divine ancestry lost since Sumer and Egypt. In nearly every culture, divine kingship was sustained through ritual. Blood was symbolic, representing continuity, memory, and sacred rite. In the temples of priests carried out daily rites to renew the bond of heaven and earth. In Egypt, the pharaoh offered incense to Ra at sunrise, reaffirming his place as mediator. Among the Maya, royal bloodletting was a sacred duty, not punishment, a way to release the vision serpent, through which ancestors and gods could communicate. Power was never purely political. It was genetic, cosmological, and spiritual. Modern historians interpret these claims as myth-making, a way to justify rule through religion. Yet the repetition of details across isolated civilizations suggests a deeper root. The idea of celestial descent, encoded in blood, may reflect a collective memory of contact and attempt to preserve identity through lineage. For the ancients, blood was more than life. It was record. It carried the memory of those who once came down from the sky. Even when the gods disappeared, their line continued in ritual form. The crowns, the robes, the symbols of serpents and suns, all remnants of a relationship once physical, now ceremonial. To rule was to remember. To inherit was to guard the covenant. And through generations, every king and priest looked upward, believing that their ancestors still watched from the constellations that bore their names. When the stars moved, they listened for omens. When thunder rolled, they heard command. The rulers of early humanity did not imagine themselves as masters of the earth, but as caretakers of a bond first written in the sky. The architects beneath the earth. In almost every corner of the ancient world, myths describe the same pattern. Beings of light who descended from the heavens, walked among men, and when their time ended, vanished not upward, but downward. Beneath mountains, under deserts, into hidden chambers of stone. From Mesopotamia to Tibet, from the Andes to the American Southwest, legends speak of vast underground cities where the architects of the First Age withdrew to watch the surface from below. Their disappearance marked not extinction, but retreat. Civilization, they said, was merely the upper floor of a much older world. In Sumer, the oldest records of the Anunnaki describe them as those who came from heaven to earth, and from earth to the great below. Archaeologists found references to Kur, the subterranean realm ruled by the goddess Ereshkigal. Unlike the later Christian hell, Kur was not a place of punishment, but of origin and return. The text Descent of Inanna tells how the goddess of heaven travels through 7 gates beneath the earth to meet her sister in the underworld. She passes by guardians, sheds her ornaments, and stands naked before judgment. The story was symbolic, but its geography reads like a map: tunnels, chambers, gates, and thresholds. Some Sumerian tablets even describe the shining ones who dwell in the deep places, servants of Enki, who worked in the darkness of the Absu. That word Absu meant both the abyss and the hidden waters. It was also the name of Enki's temple in Eridu, said to have chambers descending beneath the river, filled with the sound of flowing water and the hum of unseen machinery. In Egypt, the same image reappears. The ancient texts call the underworld Duat, a region beneath the western horizon. To enter it, one passed through 12 gates aligned with hours of night, each guarded by serpents and figures of flame. The Book of What is in the Duat describes lakes of fire, tunnels of stone, and ships that carried the souls of gods beneath the earth. but within the myth lay practical echoes. Beneath the sands of Saqqara and Giza, archaeologists have discovered entire networks of tunnels chambers carved from bedrock, lined with granite, and sometimes sealed with massive doors. The Serapeum, for instance, lies 30 meters underground, containing sarcophagi so large they could not have been built inside the space itself. The walls are polished to mirror smoothness, as if cut by light. The ancients claimed the builders were guided by those who walked with Ra in the hidden paths of night. Far to the east, Tibetan legends tell of Agartha, the hidden kingdom beneath the Himalayas. Buddhist texts describe it as a realm of radiant beings who survived a great cataclysm by moving underground. In the 1920 seconds, the traveller Nicholas Roerich recorded local accounts of tunnels leading deep under the mountains, where the king of the world rules in silence. The monk said this realm connects through vast channels to other sacred sites, Shambhala, Lhasa, and Lake Manasarova. The people who dwell there, they said, still guard the ancient sciences, waiting for the surface to be ready again. In Central and South America, similar traditions persist. The Inca spoke of the Chincanas stone passageways running beneath Cusco, built by Viracocha's followers. The Spanish chronicler, Cieza de León, wrote of explorers who entered the tunnels and never returned. Local Quechua legends warned that the paths extended all the way to Lake Titicaca. Near the lake itself lies the Gate of Aramumuru, a massive doorway carved into a sandstone cliff. It leads nowhere, a flat wall, yet the people call it Puerta de los Dioses, the Gate of the Gods. They say priests once approached it carrying a golden disc that shimmered like the sun. When placed into a depression at the center, the stone glowed and opened. Those who entered, the story says, walked into another world, not above the sky, but beneath the earth. In Mexico, the Aztecs spoke of Chicamostoc, the 7 caves of origin, from which the first tribes emerged, guided by their gods. The caves were said to glow with blue light, and from them came language, tools, and order. In the Yucatan, the Maya believed their ancestors came from the Xibalba, an underworld ruled by the lords of death, but also home to knowledge and renewal. The Popol Vuh describes hero twins descending through 9 layers of this realm, facing trials of fire, darkness, and silence, before returning to the surface transformed. Archaeologists have since found cenotes' natural sinkholes beneath many temples, leading into vast networks of water-filled caverns. Offerings, pottery, and even human remains lie deep inside, as if the people sought communion with the beings below. Among the Hopi of North America, stories speak of the ant people who sheltered humanity underground during 2 great world destructions. These beings, described as tall, pale, and kind, taught the survivors how to live by growing food beneath the earth. When it was safe, they led them back to the surface through a spiral passage called the Sipapu. To this day, Hopi Kiva's ceremonial chambers built underground contain a small hole symbolizing that passage, a reminder of origins beneath, not above. The theme continues in later cultures under different names. The Greek Hades, the Norse Svartalfheim, the Celtic Anne, the Christian harrowing of hell. Each describes a hidden world that mirrors the one above, a realm of sleep, waiting, and preservation. To the ancients, it was not a place of punishment, but a vault, a chamber where divine presence retreated. Modern explorers have found hints of these legends etched into stone. Beneath the Pyramid of the Sun at Teotihuacan lies a tunnel sealed since antiquity, discovered only in 2003. Inside were spheres of pyrite and hematite that shimmer under torchlight materials associated with light and reflection. At Giza, ground-penetrating radar has revealed cavities beneath the Sphinx and Pyramid complex. In Turkey's Derinkuyu region, entire underground cities extend for miles, multi-level labyrinths with ventilation shafts, wells, and doors that roll shut like stone wheels. They could house thousands, complete with stables and chapels. No one knows who built them or when. Local tradition says they were carved by those who fled from the light of the sky. The connection between heaven and underworld may have been more than myth. If the beings of old once came from the sky, perhaps their withdrawal beneath the ground represented a cycle of descent, first from above to earth, then from earth to below. Ancient tablets describe the world as a layered structure: heaven above, the surface in the middle, and the Abzu beneath. To ascend or descend through these levels was to move between states of knowledge. To later generations, the underground became a metaphor for hidden wisdom. Alchemists spoke of the tomb of Hermes, buried in the desert sands, where the emerald tablet lay inscribed with the words, "As above, so below." They saw the underworld not as darkness, but as reflection, the mirror image of the heavens. The secrets of the sky were preserved in the deep places of the earth, awaiting rediscovery. Whether these realms exist as physical chambers or symbolic memory, they share a single theme: withdrawal with purpose. The architects did not die, they concealed. They built sanctuaries below to protect their knowledge from the chaos above. And in moments of upheaval, floods, wars, or the turning of ages, people still look to mountains, caves, and ruins, believing that somewhere beneath, the last lights of the first civilization still burn. The celestial machines, long before the first aircraft lifted from a modern runway, ancient scribes were writing of flight. Across Sumer, India, Egypt, and Greece, there appear descriptions of objects that rose from the earth with sound, fire, and motion. The people who witnessed them did not have words like engine or metal. They called them chariots, thrones, or wheels of the gods. The stories remain consistent, detailed, strangely technical. For some, they are only symbols of divinity. For others, they may be memories of technology mistaken for miracles. The oldest accounts come from Mesopotamia. Cuneiform tablets from the city of Lagash mention shining boats that ride upon the wind. In Akkadian texts, Enki travels in a makuru, a ship of the heavens. The Epic of Etana, dating to around 2300 BCE, describes a man carried aloft by an eagle-like being. The land became but a hill, the sea but a river. The perspective is that of someone rising through the air, watching the world shrink below. For centuries, scholars read it as myth, yet its imagery of ascent remains strikingly literal. In India, the Vedas and Puranas describe machines called vimanas, flying vehicles of the gods. The Rig Veda speaks of Indra's chariot, powered by lightning and driven by thought. The Mahabharata and Ramayana expand these accounts, describing multi-level aerial craft capable of crossing continents. The Vaimanika Shastra, a Sanskrit text attributed to the sage Bharadvaja, lists types of vimanas and their propulsion systems: engines powered by mercury, controlled by rotating gyros, clad in metals that could withstand heat. Although written centuries later, the details appear mechanical, not metaphorical. The descriptions of sound, a roaring of wind, and beams of light, brighter than 1,000 suns, recall something more physical than divine vision. In Egypt, the walls of the Temple of Edfu describe the ships of the builders that came from the sky before the first time, Zep-Tepi. They are said to have landed upon the mounds of the earth to restore order after a flood. At Abydos, one temple lintel shows carved outlines resembling modern aircraft helicopters, planes, and discs. Egyptologists explain these as the result of overlapping hieroglyphs from later restorations. But the imagery continues to intrigue. The oldest known word for such objects in Egyptian texts is Sekhem, meaning both power and vessel of energy. The priests wrote that the gods travelled in shining boats that could traverse the sky as easily as the Nile. The Hebrew prophet Ezekiel's vision by the river Chebar remains one of the most detailed ancient accounts of A Machine of the Heavens. Written around 593 BCE, it describes a whirlwind from the north, a great cloud, and fire enfolding itself. Within it were 4 living beings, each with wheels beside them, a wheel within a wheel, and the spirit of the living creature was in the wheels. The craft rose from the ground in flashes of lightning. Ezekiel calls it the glory of the Lord, yet the description reads less like metaphor than mechanical observation movement, sound, structure. Scholars have translated his words in many ways, but the image of rotating motion within rotating motion endures a technology so complex that the only language available for it was religious awe. In the Americas, the Mayan codices and carvings depict the gods descending in serpent ropes, beams of light, or woven ladders that touch the ground. On the sarcophagus of Pakal at Palenque, the king is shown reclined before what appears to be a control panel surrounded by symbols of fire and air. Archaeologists interpret it as the world tree, but the composition, his body angled as if in a cockpit, flames below, and a plume rising upward has led others to call it the Mayan astronaut. Nearby inscriptions describe his journey to the stars, guided by the shining lords of the sky. Ancient China holds its own record of celestial machines. The Shanhai Jing, the classic of mountains and seas, compiled more than 2,000 years ago, mentions dragons of fire that descended with great thunder. In later Han Dynasty accounts, Emperor Shun is said to have travelled through the air in a flying chariot built by Lu Ban, the master craftsman. The design reportedly used wooden frames and silk sails that could rise with the wind. When the device flew, witnesses described it as shimmering like glass. Among the Greeks, the poet Hesiod wrote of the gods' golden chariots, borne upon the wings of the wind. Plato's Phaedrus refers to vehicles of the soul by which immortals travel between realms. Centuries later, the Roman writer Lucian described ships in the air carrying soldiers to the moon. To the philosophers, flight symbolized enlightenment, but the consistency of technical details, from engines of wind to wheels of fire, hints at something older. Archaeological discoveries have added to the enigma. In 1902, workers near Baghdad unearthed small clay jars fitted with copper cylinders and iron rods. When filled with acidic liquid, they generate electricity. Known as the Baghdad batteries, they date to around 200 BCE. Their purpose remains uncertain, but the ability to store charge predates modern rediscovery by millennia. In Egypt's Dendera temple, a wall relief shows figures holding large bulb-shaped objects connected by cords to what appears to be a power source. Egyptologists call it a symbol of creation, yet its resemblance to a lamp is difficult to ignore. Legends from the Pacific and Africa speak of similar phenomena. The Dogon of Mali describe their sky teachers, the Nomo, arriving in ark-like vessels that turned with fire. Polynesian myths tell of gods travelling on canoes that shone like the moon, leaving trails of light that split the sea. The imagery of brightness, sound, and rotation repeats across languages that never met. Even the Greek term ether, the invisible medium through which light and thought travelled, carries echoes of these early machines. To the ancients, ether was both substance and pathway, the highway of the gods. The Sanskrit akasha, the Egyptian ka, the Hebrew ruach, all mean the same thing: breath, wind, spirit, movement through unseen force. Whether spiritual or physical, it was always associated with flight. Modern readers find in these stories fragments of early science fiction, but to those who first told them, they were history recordings of encounters preserved in the only language available. The gods were not described as invisible or bodiless. They arrived in vehicles, left in them, and taught through them. The sky itself was a field of transit. If such machines ever existed, their traces would fade with time. Metal corrodes, tools vanish, but stories endure. The consistency of form, the roar, the fire, the descent, suggests a memory too specific to be coincidence. For ancient witnesses, the noise of engines would have been thunder, the radiance of power would have been divinity. What we call technology, they called gods. The Mahabharata describes the end of the celestial machines clearly. When the great war had ended, the sky chariots returned to the heavens, and the sound of their wheels was no more. The world below fell silent. The golden age of contact closed like a door. Humanity remained, holding fragments knowledge of flight, of numbers, of power. The gods withdrew, and the machines that bore them disappeared into the same silence that hides so much of early history. In the dust of ruins and the lines of myth, there lingers an image, not of wings or halos, but of craft shining in the sun, rising slowly into the clouds. The ancients called them vehicles of the sky. We might call them something else. But the memory they left is the same a time when the boundary between technology and divinity was not yet drawn, and the heavens themselves were alive with motion. When the gods departed, there is a moment repeated across every mythology, a quiet turning when the sky beings, the builders, the teachers begin to leave. It does not come with fire or war, but with stillness. The stars grow distant, the temples lose their voices, and the languages that once echoed their names fall silent. Humanity continues, but something changes in the rhythm of the world. The link between heaven and earth becomes memory. In the Sumerian records, the departure is described as a withdrawal of presence. The great Anunnaki, who decree fate, sat down and wept, reads a line from the lament for Ur. The gods had once walked in the courtyards of their temples. Now their thrones were empty. The priests wrote that they had ascended to the high mountains, carrying their shining tools with them. Cities remained, but the light that guided them was gone. The clay tablets continue for centuries afterward, yet the tone shifts from instruction to nostalgia. The age of revelation became the age of remembrance. In Egypt, the final departure was called the departure of the Neteru. The coffin texts speak of the moment when Ra, weary of mankind's restlessness, sailed away in his celestial boat. "I shall withdraw to the horizon," he says. "Let my children rule the earth." What followed was not collapse but silence. The monuments, once built as points of communication, became tombs. The priests performed the rituals, but the responses no longer came. To them, the gods had not died, they had retreated beyond reach. The pyramids remained as frozen echoes of ascent, stairways pointing toward where the voices had vanished. In India, the great Mahabharata closes with a similar stillness. After the wars of the gods and heroes, Krishna departs the world. When the Lord left, the age of darkness began. The text calls this the start of Kali Yuga, an age of forgetting. The luminous weapons are lost, the flying chariots silent. Humanity remains with fragments of knowledge enough to build, but not to understand. The pattern is one of slow fading, brilliance followed by dusk. Among the Maya, the departure was marked in calendars. The long count did not predict the end of the world, as later misreadings claimed, but the end of communication. The fifth sun, they said, would end not in fire or water, but in absence, the gods withdrawing their gaze until the next cycle. The Popol Vuh describes it simply: they ascended into the sky, and their words became the wind. Across cultures, the outcome is the same. The teachers leave, the world continues. Civilization rises, builds, forgets, and begins to ask again. Even in later texts, echoes persist. The Hebrew book of Ezekiel speaks of a vision by the river Chebar, a wheel within a wheel, burning with eyes, rising into the sky. The prophet calls it the glory of the Lord, but its language mirrors older accounts of departure, thunder, brightness, motion. The divine chariot does not descend, it lifts away. In the Andes, the god Viracocha walks into the Pacific, disappearing into the light. The chroniclers wrote that fishermen saw his glowing form sink beneath the waves and then rise toward the horizon. He promised to return, as did Quetzalcoatl in the east, as did Thoth, as did Enki. The pattern of departure always includes return. Each culture looked upward afterward, building calendars, observatories, and myths around the expectation that someday, when the stars realigned, the sky would open once more. Archaeologists call this longing the birth of religion. Anthropologists call it myth-making to explain absence. Yet there is something measured in the way the ancients recorded it, factual, restrained, without poetry. They came, the tablets say. They taught. They left. No struggle, no death. Just disappearance, as if departure were a natural part of the cycle. Over time, the memory fractured into metaphors. The shining ones became angels. The architects became saints, sages, and heroes. Their machines became symbols, wheels of fire, thrones of light, heavenly ladders. What had once been observation became allegory. The further humanity moved from the original encounter, the more divine its memory became. By the first millennium BCE, the gods had ceased to visit. The priests became historians of heaven, preserving rituals whose meanings they no longer fully understood. The temples turned to stone museums of lost contact. The sky, once alive with signs, became background. Humanity began to measure it with mathematics rather than myth, seeking again what it had already known. Science rose as a rediscovery of what memory had transformed into legend. Even in modern times, fragments of the old pattern remain. Civilizations still point their greatest constructions towards the sky: radio telescopes, observatories, launch pads. Humanity still builds towers, still names them after stars, still waits for signals. The methods have changed, but the impulse is the same: to reach those who left. The watchers of became the astronomers of today. The clay tablets became data files. The search continues with different tools, but for the same question. In the silence that followed the gods' departure, another transformation occurred. The ancients believed that when the beings left the earth, they placed a fragment of their essence within mankind. What was once communication became intuition. The divine moved inward. The Sumerian texts speak of Melam, the inner radiance. Egyptian writings call it Ka, the life force. In the Upanishads, it becomes Atman, the spark of the eternal within each human being. The external sky turned into an inner one, carried by every living mind. Perhaps this was the final gift, that when the gods withdrew, they left the ability to remember them. The monuments point upward, but memory points inward. Humanity became its own temple. What once required descent from the heavens could now arise from consciousness itself. The ancient phrase carved on a fragment from Nippur reads, "When the stars hid their faces, man became their echo." It may have been meant as lament or as instruction. To remember was to continue the dialogue. The gods did not vanish into extinction. They moved into memory, into language, into the quiet architecture of thought. Night after night, the stars still cross the same paths that Sumerian and Egyptian priests once traced. The watchers are gone, but their map remains. Every civilization, knowingly or not, walks within it, building, seeking, listening. The myths of the sky beings are older than nations, older than faiths. Whether they were travelers, teachers, or symbols of humanity's own awakening, their legacy endures in the shape of our stories and the direction of our gaze. The gods departed, but in the silence they left behind, humanity learned to speak. The ancient world is filled with echoes, temples built to mirror constellations, myths that whisper of teachers from the sky, and languages that still carry traces of their voices. Whether they were gods, travelers, or symbols of human awakening, their presence reshaped the path of civilization. And though their names have faded from stone, the question remains: did humanity build its knowledge alone, or did someone help us remember what we had once forgotten? If you'd like to keep exploring the lost origins of our world, join us again for more journeys into the quiet corners of history where myth and memory often meet. Subscribe, leave a comment, and let us know what you believe happened when the gods descended. Thank you for watching, and may the stars above you remind you that some stories never truly end.